Few bands have a story as raw, chaotic, and unforgettable as Pantera. They rose from the Texas bar scene in the 1980s, a glam metal band with big hair and bigger dreams. But what started as flashy rock would evolve into one of the heaviest, most influential forces in modern metal. Pantera's story is one of triumph, tragedy, and rebirth. This is the story of Pantera. Vincent Paul Abbott and Darrell Lance Abbott, or better known as Vinnie Paul and Dimebag Darrell, were both born and raised in Arlington, Texas. Vinnie born in 1964 and Dime born in 1966. They grew up in a deeply musical household. Their father, Jerry Abbott, was a country music songwriter, producer, and recording engineer, and their mother, Caroline Abbott, was a devoted supporter of her son's creative interests. Jerry owned a recording studio in Pantego, Texas called Pantego Sound Studio, and that environment had a huge impact on the boys. They spent a lot of time around musicians and recording equipment, which gave them an early appreciation for how songs are made and how the music would work behind the scenes. Interestingly enough, both brothers were drawn to the drums at first. Vinnie, being the older of the two, started playing them first. When Dimebag saw how cool his brother looked behind the kit, he wanted to play drums too. But their dad stepped in and suggested that if they both played the same instrument, they'd end up competing instead of creating music together. So Jerry told Dimebag something along the lines of, "Why don't you pick up the guitar and you guys could make music together?" That bit of fatherly advice changed everything. After that, Jerry purchased Dimebag his first guitar. When Dimebag Darrell got his guitar, he didn't start playing right away. According to Vinnie, Dimebag would sit in front of a mirror just holding the guitar pretending to play, and reimagining himself as a rock star. Eventually, Dimebag started learning real riffs. Once he plugged in and started making noise, his natural talent exploded. His dad's studio gave him the freedom to crank up the volume and experiment, and soon he was spending every hour playing for real. By the time he was a teenager, he'd gone from air guitaring in front of a mirror to winning local guitar contests and turning heads with his precision and creativity. Their father's musical background gave them not just access to equipment, but also discipline. They learned how to play together, record properly, and treat music as both an art and a craft. That mutual respect and creative chemistry laid the groundwork for their later success. By their teenage years, Vinnie and Dimebag were already jamming together regularly, blending heavy metal influences with the Texas rock sound that they grew up around. Dimebag and Vinnie eventually went on to form the band Gemini with bassist Tommy Bradford and vocalist Donnie Hart. During their early garage years, they would produce raw demos learning cover songs, but eventually Jerry decided that if they wanted to get anywhere, then they'd need to start producing their own music. So Jerry didn't just tell Vinnie and Dimebag to make music, he showed them how. He encouraged them to record everything they wrote and listen critically to their own recordings and learn from mistakes, experiment with tones, mic placements, and mixes, and also understand engineering and sound, not just riffs and beats. By their teens, Vinnie and Dime were already cutting demos with professional level polish, something most young bands could never afford. Jerry's biggest push was about independence. He wanted his sons to own their craft, not rely on outside producers or studios. He told them that if they wanted to succeed, they needed to control their own sound. That mindset later became a huge advantage for Gemini, and when the band started recording their first album, they understood how to track, produce, and shape a record's sonic identity. Oh yeah, and also, Tommy Bradford would leave in 1982. It was clear that Tommy simply wasn't as dedicated or technically skilled as the Abbott brothers, and Terry Glaze, their current singer, wanted the group to be. So that's when Rex Brown joined up. He and Vinnie went to the same high school and had crossed paths musically. Rex was a serious musician. He even trained in jazz and theory and had the technical chops to lock in with Vinnie's drumming and complement Dime's wild guitar style. Before the release of their debut album, Gemini would go through multiple name changes after the name Gemini. They would change their name to Eternity because it sounded cooler to them, though eventually a fan recommended that they name their band off of the D. Tommaso Pantera race car, and the band immediately latched to it. the band had once again renamed themselves to Pantera's Metal Magic. 1983, Pantera would launch their first album, self-released on Metal Magic Records, the band's own label. This album had a pure glam or hair metal aesthetic, heavily inspired by Kiss, Van Halen, Def Leppard, and Judas Priest, with vocals by Terry Glaze. Key tracks in this album were tracks such as Ride My Rocket and Tell Me If You Want It. With flashy outfits and high-pitched vocals, Pantera's first album sounded nothing like the band that they'd become, but it laid the foundation for their relentless work ethic. By the time Pantera's Metal Magic's second album rolled around, the name would be changed to simply Pantera, as they would remove the Metal Magic from their name. In 1984, Pantera launched their second album, Projects in the Jungle. Their production had slightly improved with some heavier riffs. The band started to find its identity, though they were still glam. Key tracks in this album were tracks such as All Over Tonight, Heavy Metal Rules, and Projects in the Jungle. Dimebags, or Dimebag Darrell during the glam era, guitar work began to stand out with his flashy solos and tight rhythms. By their second record, Dimebag Darrell was already a guitar hero in the making. His tone and precision stood out even in a scene dominated by image over substance. 1985, Pantera launched their third album, which would be their most musically confident of the glam era. They came up with the title I Am the Night. This album would have heavier riffs and a darker tone, practically early signs of the groove sound. Key tracks in this album were Hot and Heavy, Valhalla, and Down Below. Dime solos had also started to lean towards more of a thrash metal influence, but there seemed to be a growing tension between Terry Glaze and the rest of the band members. Terry Glaze wanted to stay glam, but the Abbott brothers wanted a heavier sound. The divide between image and intensity was growing. Pantera wanted to crush, not charm, and that difference would soon change everything. Because of their disagreements, Terry Glaze ultimately decided to leave the band, so that's when a man named Phil Anselmo joined the band in 1987. Eventually they would begin to work on yet another album titled Power Metal. This was the first album to show the true Pantera sound, however, there were still traces of glam. They were just infused with raw aggression and power metal tones. Key tracks in this album were tracks such as Power Metal, Over and Out, and Proud to Be Loud. Phil's vocals brought in a lot of grit and confidence. Fans noticed how they were evolving fast. With the arrival of Phil Anselmo, Pantera's sound transformed overnight. Gone were the sugar-coated choruses, they were replaced by snarling vocals and ferocious energy. The band that would soon redefine metal was finally taking shape. The release of Power Metal and the arrival of Phil Anselmo had created internal discussion within the band. They stated that they wanted to ditch the glam look and get serious. Dime would evolve from Dimebag Darrell to the iconic Dimebag Darrell name, and they would begin to focus on musicianship and heaviness in the late 1980s Texas metal scene. Pantera began to write new material that sounded completely different from their glam years, and in 1990, Pantera unleashed Cowboys from Hell, and this album would cause metal to never be the same again. After the release of Power Metal, the band was hungry to evolve. They ditched the glam image and doubled down on heaviness. They began to take inspiration from bands such as Metallica, Slayer, Exhorder, and Black Sabbath, but added a Texas swagger to it. Their songs had slower tempos, chunkier riffs, and attitude, forming the Pantera groove. Pantera's tone in this album became signature. It was thick, punchy, and aggressive. By 1989, Pantera was done chasing trends. They wanted to carve a sound that no one could copy. Heavy, groovy, and built for the pit. This was the birth of Cowboys from Hell. The band recorded a 12-track demo at Pantego Sound Studio. The demo was called Cowboys from Hell, and it would begin catching attention from major labels. Atco Records would sign Pantera in 1989. This is the first time Pantera would receive real label support, tour potential, and global distribution. Pantera's self-produced demo was so tight and explosive, label execs thought it was already a finished album. It was a message. The underground Texas band had found its sound, and the world was about to hear it. The album was recorded between 1989 and 1990 at Pantego Sound Studios. It was produced by Terry Date, different Terry from before, Terry Date, not Terry Glaze. Terry Date would become their longtime collaborator. Dimebag's tone had solid-state Randall amps and razor-sharp mids, which at the time made it unique. You also can't forget Phil Anselmo's vocals in this album. They balanced power and melody, blending perfectly with the tracks. Working with producer Terry Date, Pantera built a wall of sound that didn't exist before. It was tight as thrash, heavy as doom, but with a groove that made your head move. The Cowboys from Hell album released July 24th, 1990. Critics were surprised. It didn't sound anything like the era's thrash or glam. It was something new. The fans absolutely loved it. Dimebag's guitar tone and Vinnie's drumming redefined production standards in metal. And when Cowboys from Hell hit the shelves, it felt like a revolution. At the time when glam was dying and grunge hadn't arrived, Pantera gave metal a new heartbeat. This album had many iconic tracks, one being the title track Cowboys from Hell. This track had become their anthem, the riff that started it all. There's also Cemetery Gates. The track had an emotional depth, showcasing Phil's range and Dime's melodic style. Of course, there's also Domination, a fan favorite and a legendary live track, widely known for the heavy breakdown near the end of the song. It's also worth mentioning Primal Concrete Sledge, a fast, percussive, and groove-heavy track. From the opening riff of Cowboys from Hell to the crushing breakdown from Domination, the album was a masterclass in controlled chaos, aggression, and precision. Pantera then went in full force and launched the Cowboys from Hell tour, and Pantera became a touring machine. They even began opening for Judas Priest in the Painkiller tour, and they would even earn respect across Europe and the US. They were known for high energy and no-frills performances. The chemistry and intensity on stage began turning heads. Night after night, Pantera destroyed every stage they stepped on. No pyro, no backing tracks, just raw power. Little did these artists know they should have been the one opening for Pantera instead of the other way around. Dimebag in this album had famously stuck with solid-state amps because of their tight, fast attack and harsh upper mid response. And unlike tube amps, the RG100 didn't compress much, so palm mute stayed snappy and notes had this sharp, almost mechanical edge, perfect for his rhythmic precision. The tone was dry and aggressive with buzzy high mids. It also had a tight gain structure. It wasn't fuzzy or saggy like a cranked tube amp. Dime ran the gain high, but he shaped it with EQ rather than relying on distortion pedals. This band also had a secret weapon, which was the MXR 6-band EQ. They placed it right in front of the amp to sculpt the input signal before it hit the amp's preamp stage, essentially pre-EQing the distortion character. This produced a signature scooped but not muddy tone. It had huge lows and sizzling highs, but with the mid-range tune. Dime had once described it as wanting his guitar to sound like a buzzsaw that still sings. Dime was also known for his Dean ML guitars. The guitars weren't very popular at the time, so Dime was able to buy them for extremely cheap at thrift stores. I'm talking about as cheap as $75 to $100. But Dimebag's use of these guitars would make them increasingly more popular as time went on. These guitars had the ML body shape, a hybrid of V and the Explorer. It gave tons of resonance and sustain, while the large surface area enhanced the low end. Early on in his career, he used Bill Lawrence XL 500 pickups. They had an extremely high output, bright and razor sharp in the upper mids. Anyways, I should probably stop talking about his guitar, since a lot of you don't even play guitar. You probably think I'm just speaking a bunch of gibberish, but let's get back into it. In September 1991, Pantera was nearly finished producing their second album when they got a call. Pantera was asked to play in the Monsters of Rock festival at the Ticino Airfield in Moscow, along with the Black Crowes, Metallica, and the headliner AC/DC. But little did Pantera know how big this show would actually be. The Soviet Union had just collapsed, and heavy metal, once banned behind the Iron Curtain, came roaring through the rubble. For the band from Texas, this wasn't just another show, it was a declaration to the world. Upon arriving, the band was surprised by the immense crowd, with some accounts estimating the attendance at over 1.6 million people. It was a free concert, which contributed to the massive turnout. In the airfield, there were soldiers, fans, and chaos. When Pantera hit that Domination breakdown, the crowd erupted into history. Dimebag and Phil commanded the stage like veterans. This is the moment Pantera went from a promising new band to international metal legends. The Moscow performance actually became one of the most watched live metal videos of the 1990s. Bootleg VHS tapes circulated worldwide, and it was many fans' first glimpse of Pantera's power. From the Texas clubs to a million-strong crowd in Moscow, in just 1 year, Pantera had arrived. By the end of 1991, Pantera had done the impossible. They'd reinvent themselves, conquered the underground, and proven that pure aggression still had a place in metal. But the storm was just beginning. Their next record would take everything to a new level. The band went to Pantego Sound Studios in Arlington, Texas with producer Terry Day once more. Pantera had just broken through with Cowboys from Hell, and the label wanted a follow-up that would expand their growing fan base. Instead of softening their sound, the band went heavier, tighter, and more aggressive. Pantera's next album wouldn't just be following up Cowboys from Hell, it would define Pantera. Recording began in late 1991 and lasted until early 1992. The sessions were intense but highly focused. The band members were at their creative peak, having just spent extensive time touring together. Pantera aimed to strip away any remnants of the glam or thrash influences from their earlier years. The goal was pure power and precision, groove metal with a street-level aggression. Dimebag's guitar tone used a solid-state Randall amp and a Dean ML guitar, producing one of the most iconic metal guitar tones ever captured. Razor sharp yet full-bodied. Vinnie Paul's drums were massive and punchy, tuned for clarity and impact. The band used careful mic placement and gated reverb to achieve that signature machine gun snare sound. Rex Brown's bass provided thick low-end support, locking perfectly with the drums. And finally, Phil Anselmo's vocals were raw, enraged, and unfiltered. He pushed himself towards the extreme end of vocal delivery, mixing hardcore shouts with controlled aggression. The lyrics in Vulgar Display of Power focused on strength, defiance, and personal power, matching the music's intensity. Key tracks in this album were Mouth for War, a declaration of self-discipline and aggression, A New Level, a track about empowerment and evolution beyond limits, Walk, written about respect and betrayal, featuring one of the most iconic riffs in metal history, This Love, a rare dynamic track, moving from haunting melody to explosive anger, and also Effing Hostile, a pure burst of rage recorded in one take. The cover art of Vulgar Display of Power is one of the most recognizable and discussed images in heavy metal history. It is an unforgettable symbol of the album's raw aggression and defiance. The band wanted an image that perfectly captured the album's title, something simple, brutal, and instantly shocking. According to the band, they were looking for a visual that reflected the music's intensity, a literal punch to the face. The idea was to create a powerful moment frozen in time, with no glamour or gloss, just pure visceral impact. So they hired photographer Brad Guise, who hired another man whom we don't know the name of. The photo was shot using real film, not Photoshop or digital editing. This was 1991. Contrary to popular legend, the man was not actually punched in the face repeatedly for the shoot. For years, fans believed that he was paid $10 per punch until the photographer got the perfect shot. Brad Guise later clarified that this wasn't true, and the image was staged using timing and camera angles to stimulate the impact. The expression and motion blur created the illusion of a real strike. That said, even the band admitted they wanted it to look brutally real, something that felt like you could hear it. Pantera wasn't about speed or chaos anymore, it was about weight. Every riff designed to make your neck snap and your blood pump. They called it groove metal. Everyone else called it unstoppable. Every song on Vulgar Display of Power had a purpose and meaning. Walk became an anthem for outsiders, This Love showed their depth, and Hostile proved that they were the most dangerous band alive. After Vulgar Display of Power dropped in February 1992, Pantera immediately hit the road. They were coming off of 2 years of heavy touring for Cowboys from Hell, so they were battle-tested and razor-sharp. Their live shows at this point included raw power, no backing tracks, no tricks, just precision, volume, and violence. Every night was a test of endurance for both the band and the crowd. Phil Anselmo, the frontman, was developing his confrontational stage persona, often calling out the crowd, pacing like a fighter, and channeling genuine fury into every performance. Dimebag Darrell's guitar tone was crushingly loud and exact, while Vinnie Paul and Rex Brown formed one of the tightest rhythm sections in metal. In 1992, Pantera toured the US extensively, headlining clubs and mid-sized theaters. They shared bills with Soundgarden, White Zombie, and Skid Row, showing their crossover appeal even amid the grunge explosion. They even played major European festivals, including Monsters of Rock in the UK, performing alongside Iron Maiden and Slayer. In 1993, Pantera toured Japan and Australia for the first time. They also joined Megadeth's Countdown to Extinction tour in the US, often stealing the show despite being the support act. In the same year, they released Hostile Moments, a limited edition EP featuring tracks from the Vulgar tour. In 1994, Pantera continued headlining large venues and festivals, including their first performances in South America. Their reputation as a must-see live act peaked. Fans described shows as chaotic, physical, and cathartic. The Vulgar Display of Power tour had a rowdy and almost tribal atmosphere. The band and fans fed off each other's energy. Most pits were massive, stage diving was constant, and the shows often blurred the line between performances and riot. Offstage, Pantera became famous for their backstage parties, often involving massive drinking sessions, led by Dimebag Darrell and Vinnie, who dubbed themselves the Alcohol Commandos. They carried a VHS camcorder everywhere, recording their mayhem for what became the Pantera Vulgar video, a cult classic among fans. This home video release captured the spirit of the tour perfectly, part concert footage and part documentary. It included live clips from the Vulgar Display of Power tour, behind the scenes chaos, fan interactions, and wild partying. It helped cement Pantera's image as both the hardest band on earth and the most down to earth. Pantera's live energy terrified mainstream promoters but cemented their legend. Crowds at these shows were wild, consisting of violence, unity, and chaos. By 1993, Pantera's shows weren't just concerts, they were riots set to music. Every night, fans threw themselves into the pit, and the band gave them everything they had. Pantera is also known to be one of the few metal bands alive during the rise of grunge in the late 90s. Pantera had been a glam metal band themselves, but with the release of Cowboys from Hell, they had completely transformed into a new, heavier, groove-driven style. Pantera's sound was fresh and aggressive, bringing old-school metal and raw intensity to listeners who were starting to crave in the post-glam era and the pre-grunge movement. Grunge was all about rejecting the excess and image consciousness of the 80s metal, and Pantera fit that vibe. They were stripped down, blue color, and genuine. No makeup, no spandex, just brutal riffs and attitude. Fans who wanted heaviness but couldn't stomach glam anymore found Pantera as the real deal. Cowboys from Hell and Vulgar Display of Power came right as Nirvana was changing rock radio. While grunge was exploding, Pantera was rising in the metal underground. So they weren't competing directly for MTV airplay, but they built a massive cult following. Bands like Metallica went more mainstream with the Black Album, and Megadeth and Slayer were strong but more niche. Pantera became the de facto standard bearer for pure heavy metal in the 90s, headlining arenas while most bands are fading or breaking up. Dimebag's riffs and tone had also redefined what modern heavy guitar could sound like. And Phil Anselmo's vocal style, raw, aggressive, and emotional, fit perfectly in a world now accustomed to Kurt Cobain's emotional intensity. So while grunge dominated mainstream rock, Pantera was the one metal band that managed to sound modern, stay relevant, and feel free in a decade that otherwise moved away from the metal's 1980s image. By the Vulgar Display of Power album, Pantera had transitioned from being a regional band to being the face of modern metal. The Abbott brothers were the emotional center holding it all together. They lived the same wild lifestyle, late nights, partying, but also intense work ethic. They wanted to prove that southern metal could hang with anyone. Their shared drive gave the album its swagger, that mix of precision and pure attitude. Phil Anselmo and Rex Brown had often said that during Vulgar, the band felt like a family led by the brothers. Vinnie was the more grounded, business-minded one. Dime was the wild, creative spirit, and together they balanced the chaos that surrounded Pantera's growing fame. However, while the Abbott brothers, Dimebag and Vinnie, were widely respected for their musicianship and attitude, Pantera as a whole began to attract criticism for violence at shows, confrontational lyrics, and later, troubling ideological associations contributed to this. The album Vulgar Display of Power was deliberately raw, hostile, and confrontational. Even the album title comes from The Exorcist. Songs like Effing Hostile, A New Level, and Rise were built around defiance and aggression. Messages that resonated deep with frustrated young fans in the early 90s, but the same intensity that also encouraged mosh pit violence and the us versus them attitude at shows. Pantera concerts became infamous for their sheer ferocity. Some fans loved that authenticity, others thought it glorified aggression and macho posturing. Dime and Vinnie loved the mayhem as part of their culture, but as the crowds grew, it sometimes went too far. Around this time, Phil Anselmo started to adopt a more intimidating, confrontational stage presence. Shaved head, combat boots, and aggressive speeches between songs. He would talk a lot about strength, realness, and rejecting false metal, often calling out trends or other bands he saw as inauthentic. Some bands found this empowering, while other bands saw it as borderline violent or elitist. Anselmo's intensity was part of what made Pantera so magnetic, but it also made the band polarizing. In the early 90s, the press didn't know what to make of Pantera. Grunge was dominating headlines with emotional introspection, while Pantera represented pure aggression and masculinity. Critics often accused the band of being meat-headed or regressive, missing that the Abbotts were serious musicians who basically reinvented heavy metal. The album cover, a man taking a full force punch to the face, added to the shock value and controversy, reinforcing their violent reputation. While the most serious controversies came after Vulgar, the seeds were planted here. Anselmo was increasingly vocal and unpredictable live, sometimes ranting between songs. The growing divide between him and the Abbott brothers began in small ways during this period, mostly due to creative differences and lifestyle changes and the band's fame exploding. Vinnie and Dime were generally apolitical and fun-loving with their booze, barbecue, and metal types, while Phil was diving into darker, more philosophical territory. Those tensions were subtle in 1992, but it would later fracture the band. Despite the controversy, Vulgar Display of Power began a rallying cry for a generation of metal bands who felt abandoned by the mainstream. To them, Pantera represented real metal integrity. No eyeliner, no fake smiles, just power and truth. But to outsiders, Pantera symbolized toxic aggression and hypermasculinity. The album had debuted strong for a pure metal record, reaching number 44 on the Billboard 200, impressive considering that there were no pop singles, just relentless heaviness. Within only a year of release, the album went gold after selling 500,000 copies, and by July 7, 1997, Vulgar was certified platinum after it had over 1 million copies sold. It has since sold over 2 million copies worldwide and remains Pantera's most critically acclaimed record. This was huge for a metal album released during the grunge explosion, especially one with minimal MTV or radio play. At first, critics were mixed. Some dismissed Pantera as too aggressive or one-dimensional, but metal fans and musicians got it immediately. Guitarists were blown away by Dimebag Darrell's tone and precision. Drummers idolized Vinnie Paul's mix of groove and technicality, and Phil Anselmo's voice, swinging from deep growls to screams, set a new standard for metal vocalists. Over time, Vulgar Display of Power has come to be seen as a masterpiece of the 1990s, often ranked alongside Master of Puppets and Rain and Blood as one of the most influential metal albums ever recorded. It's often credited with inventing groove metal, inspiring bands like Lamb of God, Machine Head, and Sepultura's later sound. Tracks such as Walk, Mouth for War, and A New Level became anthems of defiance and strength. Rolling Stone, Metal Hammer, and Kerrang! Have all listed it among the greatest metal albums of all time, and in 2017, Vulgar Display of Power was even included in the Rolling Stones 100 Greatest Metal Albums of All Time, ranked at number 10. After the success of the Vulgar Display of Power album and tour, the band went back into the studio and started recording the production of a new Pantera album, Far Beyond Driven. By the end of 1993, Pantera stood alone at the top of heavy metal. But success came with a cost. Behind the scenes, the intensity that fueled their music was starting to take a toll. After the release of Vulgar Display of Power, the band was at the top of the world. Vulgar successfully went platinum and became metal's biggest name, but Pantera wanted to go even heavier. They had a new mindset. They were no longer chasing hits, they were chasing destruction. After Vulgar display of power, Pantera could have played it safe. Instead, they turned everything up. The volume, the aggression, and the danger. Their next album wasn't just heavier, it was Far Beyond Driven. Far Beyond Driven was written at Abbott recording studio in Nashville, produced again by Terry Date. Dimebag pushed for even heavier riffs and more experimentation, and Phil's lyrics dive deeper into pain and introspection, influenced by physical and emotional turmoil. Phil Anselmo had developed severe lower back pain from years of high energy performing and headbanging. He said in interviews that around 1993 through 1994, he had multiple herniated discs and chronic nerve pain, but Phil refused to get surgery because he was terrified it would end his ability to perform. So instead, Phil decided he would try to tough it out, which led him down a darker path. To keep performing night after night, Phil began self-medicating heavily, starting with painkillers, then alcohol, and eventually stronger drugs like heroin. Phil was trying to numb the pain, both physical and emotional. The rest of Pantera, especially Vinnie and Dimebag, noticed his behavior changing. His stage rants became more erratic, his temper shorter, and his isolation from the band deeper. However, they just assumed that it was stress from touring. Musically, Far Beyond Driven is a monster. Down-tuned guitars, claustrophobic mix, and zero compromise. Rex Brown's bass tone also got thicker and gritter. Vinnie's drums were precise but furious, and Phil's vocals more guttural and more tortured. March 2nd, 1994, Pantera released the Far Beyond Driven album, and it was an instant success. The album debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200, and people considered it to be the heaviest album to ever hit number 1 on the board. When Far Beyond Driven debuted at number 1, critics were stunned. No one expected something this heavy, this ugly, and this pure to top the charts. Pantera had dragged extreme metal into the mainstream on their own terms. Important tracks in this album were tracks such as Strength Beyond Strength, Immediate Chaos, a mission statement about their record. Becoming consisted of experimental double kick grooves. It also included Dime's whammy pedal innovation. 5 Minutes Alone was born from a real altercation, the ultimate Pantera anger anthem. I'm Broken was Phil's lyrical reflection on his injury and state of mind. And Planet Caravan was a haunting Black Sabbath cover, a surprisingly calm ending to the album. Every song in Far Beyond Driven was a battle cry. From the unstoppable force of becoming to the dark awareness of I'm Broken. Even their cover of Planet Caravan showed a rare moment of peace before the storm returned. Pantera then launched the Far Beyond Driven tour in spring of 1994. They covered North America, Europe, Japan, and Australia. They played hundreds of shows across more than 20 countries and headlined several festivals including Monsters of Rock, Donington, and Dynamo. They shared stages with Slayer, Sepultura, Prong, White Zombie, and Biohazard, among others. Everywhere they went, Pantera drew massive crowds, often outselling grunge and alternate rock acts in the same cities. The Far Beyond Driven tour shows were explosive, loud, tight, violent, and absolutely relentless. Fans described it as a war zone with riffs. Dimebag Darrell was at his peak, his tone was perfect and his solos were chaotic. Vinnie Paul's drumming was a machine, mixing precision and swing. Rex Brown kept the low end thick and nasty. And Phil Anselmo, despite his worsening back injury, gave some of the most powerful and raw performances of his life, alternating between chilling screams and charismatic rants. The crowds were insane, walls of mosh pits, stage diving, beer flying, and pure chaos. Pantera shows in the Far Beyond Driven era became the definitive heavy metal experience of the decade. The tour was a major financial success, drawing huge audiences and selling tons of merch. They played to arena-sized crowds in the US and Europe. In the UK, Pantera's Donington Monsters of Rock performance is still remembered as one of the most ferocious sets in the festival's history. Their homecoming shows in Texas routinely sold out tens of thousands of seats as well. Critics were stunned. Here was a pure metal band, outselling most of the rock world. Metal Hammer and Kerrang both named them Best Live Band multiple times in the mid-90s. However, behind the scenes, the Far Beyond Driven tour was grueling and dangerous. Phil Anselmo's back injury was worsening fast. The endless touring schedule, night after night of headbanging and screaming made it unbearable. To cope, he turned increasingly to painkillers, alcohol, and heroin. This led to erratic behavior, unpredictable moods, and growing distance between him and the Abbott brothers. The show stayed tight because Dime, Vinnie, and Rex were total pros, but offstage, cracks were forming. But fans had yet to see the fractures yet. On stage, Pantera looked unstoppable. Far Beyond Driven was a disaster and a success. Financially successful, but mentally draining. By 1995, Far Beyond Driven went platinum certified, and it was recognized as one of the heaviest mainstream albums ever released. It had also cemented Pantera's status as metal's new kings and set the tone for their next album. By the mid-90s, Pantera was untouchable, metal's last true outlaws. But behind the victory was a growing darkness that no one could stop. And their next album would reveal how deep it ran. After the Far Beyond Driven tour, Pantera had gained an immense amount of fame and success. They'd gone from Texas bar gigs to the biggest metal band in the world, selling out arenas and topping charts, all while staying brutally heavy. But behind the success, Phil Anselmo continued to be in agony. Phil Anselmo was in near constant pain due to his back injury. The Abbott brothers didn't fully understand the severity of his pain. All they saw was Phil was changing. He was drinking harder, talking less, and spending more time alone. Dime and Vinnie were brothers who partied hard but stayed close and upbeat. Phil was spiraling inward, dark, and unpredictably. Pantera had climbed higher than anyone thought possible, but at the top, the view wasn't peaceful, it was poisoned. Pain, pressure, and addiction began to eat away at the brotherhood that built them. Pantera's next album would be their most chaotic, fractured, and emotionally raw recording Pantera had ever made. And that's because the band did not record it together. It's the only Pantera album where the members are physically separated during the process, reflecting the deep tensions and personal struggles going on at the time. Dimebag Darrell, Vinnie Paul, and Rex Brown recorded all guitars, drums, and bass at the Pantego Sound Studios in Arlington, Texas, as per usual, but Phil Anselmo recorded all of his vocals alone at Trent Reznor's Nothing Studios in New Orleans. He worked with producer/engineer Sean Bevan, who had previously worked with bands such as Nine Inch Nails. Phil was deep into addiction, chronic pain, and emotional turmoil. He was isolated, and that separation influenced the entire feel of the album. Phil and Anselmo recording separately was not a creative choice. It was a consequence of the band's fractured relationships and Phil's physical and emotional state. He stayed in New Orleans because 1. His back injury was making travel miserable. 2. His heroin addiction was worsening, and he didn't want the band to see it. 3. He felt more comfortable with the darker, industrial atmosphere of Nothing Studios. And lastly, creative and personal tensions with the Abbott brothers began to rise. So instead of flying to Texas, Phil insisted on working alone, and the band reluctantly agreed. While Phil struggled, Dimebag, Vinnie, and Rex were laser focused. Dimebag's guitar work was more chaotic, dissonant, and experimental than ever. He used more effects and odd harmonies to match the darker tone, and played some of those violent and emotional riffs, especially on the Underground in America and Floods. Vinnie Paul's drumming was faster and more aggressive. Suicide Note Part 2 is one of the heaviest performances ever. His drumming was clean and polished, a contrast to the rawness of Phil's vocals. In Nothing Studios, Phil recorded in a dark room surrounded by his friends from Crowbar and I Hate God. Drug users, late night New Orleans chaos, as well as industrial gear, tape loops, and noise boxes. All this influenced the sound a lot. His vocals were layered, screamed, whispered, doubled, and distorted. Suicide Note Part 2 had some of the most terrifying vocals ever recorded in metal. Drag the Waters was raw and threatening, and War Nerve was pure venom and paranoia. Sean Bevan basically let Phil unleash his demons with almost no filters, and this is why Trendkill feels so unstable and desperate. Phil wasn't performing, he was breaking down on tape. During recording, the Abbotts had no idea what Phil's vocal tracks would sound like. They mailed tapes back and forth instead of working together. Phil didn't consult them on lyric themes or vocal style, and the Abbotts didn't consult Phil about musical direction. This album was recorded by a band that was no longer a band, just pieces of one. When Dime and Vinnie finally heard Phil's vocals, they were shocked by how dark and hostile they were. But it was too late to change anything. As a result, The Great Southern Trendkill would be Pantera's heaviest album, Pantera's darkest album, as well as their most emotionally honest. It would be many fans' favorites because of how real it feels. Its chaos wasn't planned, it was the sound of a band falling apart. The sessions had left permanent damage. The Abbotts felt Phil was drifting away for good. Phil felt misunderstood and isolated, and the trust that built Pantera in the 90s was fading fast. Trendkill is the audio version of a band at war with the world, and with each other. Key tracks in this album were tracks such as The Great Southern Trendkill, the title track, A Full Throttle Rage Against Fake and Commercial. War Nerve displayed Phil's hatred for critics in the media. Drag the Waters was Dime's swampy groove riff, one of their last truly unified songs. There's also Suicide Note Part 1 and 2, a centerpiece in the album, with a haunting acoustic intro to a brutal cathartic explosion. And lastly, Floods was Dimebag's magnum opus, haunting, emotional, with an unforgettable solo. You know, I might as well also mention the Underground in America and Sandblasted Skin as well, because these songs have a super cool transition that practically combines the songs. It's an album of extremes: beauty, brutality, clarity, and chaos. Suicide Note laid bare Phil's inner war, while Floods became Dimebag's masterpiece, the calm in the storm. Pantera was coming off 2 platinum albums, a #1 Billboard debut, and massive worldwide tours, so expectations were extremely high. But instead of leaning towards a more accessible sound like many bands did in the 90s, Pantera released their most brutal, uncommercial, and emotionally vicious album ever, and it was a shock. Despite being the heaviest Pantera album ever made, it performed extremely well. It made it to #4 on the Billboard 200. This is almost unheard of for something so extreme. The album had no radio-friendly singles at all, and within a few months the album was certified gold with 500,000 copies sold in the US alone. It didn't move as fast as Far Beyond Driven, but it still sold big for a record with this level of intensity. Fans were divided at the time. Hardcore Pantera fans loved the heaviness. For the metal faithful, this album felt like Pantera saying, "We're not softening, we're doubling down." Songs like War Nerve, Drag the Waters, Suicide Note Part 2, and The Great Southern Trendkill hit fans like a freight train. Many considered it a return to raw, unfiltered rage. Mainstream listeners were overwhelmed by this album. It was more chaotic, far darker lyrically, more abrasive vocally, and more experimental and dissonant. Compared to Walk, This Love, or 5 Minutes Alone, this record sounded like a psychological breakdown on tape, which was the point, but it limited mainstream appeal. Some fans were confused or even turned off by this album, especially by Phil's harsh screams, the industrial style vocal processing, and the bleakness of songs like Suicide Note Part 2. It wasn't a fun album. It was intense, depressing, and apocalyptic. Critics were also extremely mixed. Some rock and metal journalists thought Pantera had created a bold artistic statement, a darker evolution of groove metal, and their most honest album yet. Publications like Metal Hammer and Kerrang! Praised its extremity, but some mainstream critics said it was too violent, too disjointed, lyrically disturbing, and lacking catchy songs. Rolling Stone and other mainstream outlets didn't know what to do with it. It was simply too heavy for their format. Over time, however, The Great Southern Trendkill slowly transformed into a cult masterpiece. Fans now see it as Pantera's darkest and most honest work, because it was. The band was tearing apart internally, and Phil Anselmo was battling injuries, addiction, and depression. All of that pain is in the music. Today it is seen as one of the greatest metal albums of the 90s. It frequently makes lists such as Greatest Metal Albums of the 1990s, Greatest Groove Metal Albums, and Most Emotional Metal Albums. Songs like Floods and Suicide Note Part 2 have become legendary. Floods is often cited as Dimebag's greatest guitar solo, and Suicide Note Part 2 is one of the heaviest songs ever released by a mainstream metal band. Younger metal fans also often discover it first now, thanks to streaming. The album's reputation exploded because it sounded modern, raw, and relevant. May 17th, 1996, Pantera launched the tour for their brand new album, The Great Southern Trendkill. Before the tour began, things were already bad with the album being recorded separately. Communication was nearly non-existent. Phil was battling serious addiction, self-isolation, and sinking emotionally. The Abbott brothers were worried, frustrated, and confused by his behavior. Trust between the members was already severely damaged. They went on tour as a band that was already half broken. On the road, Phil Anselmo's addiction problems exploded. His back injury and heroin use made touring nearly impossible for him. During this tour, he appeared on stage in visible pain, sometimes moving stiffly or limping. He drank heavily to numb the pain before shows, and often disappeared from band hangouts, staying isolated in his own circle. His mood and behavior also became inconsistent, warm one night, volatile the next. Some nights he sounded incredible, other nights he seemed barely present. The unpredictability terrified the Abbotts. Dime and Vinnie felt they were losing Phil. This tour was where the Abbotts realized Phil was drifting away, emotionally and physically. On previous tours, the band had lived as a family. They partied together, they traveled together, they wrote together, and they protected each other. But now Phil traveled separately, stayed in different hotels, barely rehearsed with them, and rarely hung out after shows. For the Abbotts, who valued brotherhood above everything, this felt like betrayal and heartbreak. Phil's onstage behavior even began to feel confrontational. Phil's stage rants during this era became infamous. He would go on long speeches about fake people, the media, or real music. Sometimes he lashed out at crowds or critics, and he made unpredictable, sometimes incendiary comments. Shows occasionally ended abruptly if Phil's health or mood collapsed. Some fans loved their honest, but others were confused or concerned. The Abbotts were angry and embarrassed, but also worried that Phil was spiraling out of control. Musically during this tour, they were ferocious, arguably the heaviest performances Pantera ever gave. Dimebag was a machine, consistent, sharp, and on fire every night. Vinnie Paul was locked in behind the kit with mechanical precision, and Rex held the low end even as tensions rose around him. There were nights where Phil sounded possessed, delivering the great Southern Trendkill material with terrifying intensity, especially with War Nerve, Sandblasted Skin, and Suicide Note Part 2. The contrast between the musical tightness and interpersonal chaos was striking. However, backstage tension was constant. Crew members and friends from that era talk about arguments over missing rehearsals, Phil disappearing for long periods, the Abbotts expressing fear for his health, frequent confrontations, emotional breakdowns, and a sense that the band was living show to show. Dime and Vinnie were deeply loyal. They wanted to help Phil, but they couldn't reach him. Meanwhile, Phil felt misunderstood and overwhelmed, but that's when things took a dark turn. On July 13th, 1996, after a show in Dallas, Phil Anselmo overdosed on heroin backstage and was clinically pronounced dead for several minutes before being revived. This shattered the band emotionally. Dimebag was devastated, Vinnie was furious and terrified, and Rex was stuck in the middle, and Phil felt ashamed. In multiple interviews after 1996, Vinnie said things along the lines of, "We were scared to death. We almost lost our brother. It made us pull together." That night genuinely shook the band to its core. Dime, Vinnie, and Rex were terrified for Phil and realized they could have lost him forever. Immediately after they railed around Phil, they talked more openly, they tried to support him, and they became more unified. The Abbotts hoped this would be the point where Phil chose recovery and recommitment. But this closeness unfortunately didn't last. The deeper troubles didn't go away. Even Vinnie said later that although the overdose brought us together, it didn't fix Phil's addiction. His ongoing back pain, his emotional decline, his increasing isolation, and the creative disagreements brewing beneath everything. Phil also had a desire to work on side projects, so although Phil was revived physically, the underlying struggles remained. By 1997, the Trendkill tour wrapped up, but Pantera was not the same band they were before. The band was barely holding together. Communications were nearly shut down. The Abbotts felt betrayed by Phil's distance and drug use. Phil felt judged and abandoned, and the emotional bond that had carried the band through the 90s was weakened. The Abbotts were shaken, unsure if the band can continue. Despite turmoil, they persevered into 1997 through 1998, releasing official Live 101 Proof as a statement of unity. Somehow they kept going. 101 Proof was their battle cry, proof that the fire still burned, even if it was killing them. The Great Southern Trendkill is now held as a masterpiece. It's brutally honest, emotionally devastating, and it is seen as the true soul of Pantera, unfiltered, unhinged, and unforgettable. This era held the heaviest expression of their art and pain. Trendkill wasn't Pantera's heaviest record, it was their confession. A raw glimpse into the cost of being the loudest, angriest, and most authentic band on the earth. And it left scars that would never fully be healed. After the Great Southern Trendkill, Pantera was still massive, but severely fractured. The band was emotionally drained. Trendkill was the heaviest album Pantera had ever produced, and the tour was even more intense. But emotionally, the band was wrecked afterward. Phil was in the worst state and mental condition of his life. Dime and Vinnie were exhausted and worried about their friend, and the entire touring cycle felt unstable and unpredictable. When the tour ended, they didn't celebrate, they limped home. Rex once said, "When that tour ended, we were all just empty." Even though the overdose in 1996 briefly brought the band closer, Phil's addiction to heroin and painkillers still continued after the tour. His chronic back pain was still there. He was in and out of cycles of using heroin. His physical health was deteriorating and his depression deepening. He kept telling the band he'd be okay, but he wasn't. This made the Abbotts feel helpless and frustrated. After the tour, Phil disappeared into New Orleans more and more. He wasn't spending time in Texas, he wasn't rehearsing with the band regularly, and he wasn't communicating consistently. And he surrounded himself with a different group of people. The Abbotts, who ran Pantera like a family unit, felt abandoned. Dime especially took this personally. He loved Phil deeply and couldn't understand why their bond was fading. Side projects also began taking over. After the tour, Phil threw himself into Down, Superjoint Ritual, and Underground New Orleans collaborations. Instead of using his energy to heal the band relationship, he poured it into new projects. The Abbotts interpreted this as a sign he was losing interest in Pantera, prioritizing other music and running from the emotional weight of their relationship. Vinnie said, "We just wanted our band back. Felt like everyone else was getting Phil except us." Tensions between the Abbotts and Phil became the new norm. After the Trendkill cycle ended, the international dynamic shifted permanently. Before Trendkill, Pantera had unity, brotherhood, and a shared mission. However, after Trendkill, Pantera was distanced with wounded communication. They still loved each other, but the emotional bond that held the band together once in the early 90s was no longer strong. Arguments became more frequent, recording sessions became less collaborative, and the brotherly energy was gone. After years of chaos, Pantera wanted a reset, a return to the brotherhood they once had. Their next album was meant to heal the wounds, but the scars ran too deep. Pantera had worked with Terry Date as their producer since Cowboys from Hell, but their new album changed the formula. Reinventing the Steel had Dimebag Darrell and Vinnie Paul as the producers, and Terry Date as the co-producer / engineer / mixer. This was the first time the Abbott brothers took major control of Pantera's production. They wanted to take their band back to the groove metal roots, keep things simple and heavy, eliminate the chaos of the Trendkill sessions, and bring back the sound closer to how they played live. Vinnie later said, "We wanted to produce a record that sounded like Pantera playing together in a room. That was the mission." Just like the earlier albums, the bulk of the instrumental tracks were recorded at Chasson Jason's studio in Arlington, Texas, the Abbott's home / warehouse studio. This kept them comfortable and in control of the environment, something they desperately wanted after the fractured record of Trendkill, where Phil recorded vocals in New Orleans. For Reinventing the Steel, they aimed to keep the sessions local and unified. Phil did record some vocals in Texas with the band this time, which was a big improvement compared to their previous album, where the vocal performance was done separately, but he wasn't around as consistently as he had been in the earlier years. Some vocals were recorded with the band, but some were done separately. Communication was better than 1996, but not back to the tight brotherhood of 1992 through 1994. Phil was deep into his side projects, and although he was committed to Pantera, he wasn't hanging around the studio like he used to. Rex Brown later said, "We tried to bring the unity back, and in some ways we did, but Phil still had one foot in New Orleans." But still, the process was far less chaotic than Trendkill. In this album, Dime dialed back the extreme experimentation of Trendkill and went for a huge, warm and classic Pantera tone. The tone was tight, with a crunchy mid-range, was less chaotic and had more of a focus on groove riffs, more melodic leads, and a punchier attack. This album was Dime's attempt to celebrate everything he loved about metal, especially early heavy music like Judas Priest and Black Sabbath. His playing was more fun and anthemic compared to the dark, tortured ferocity of Trendkill. Vinnie Paul's drum production was bigger, brighter and tighter. He wanted clarity and power. Kick drums were extremely punchy, the snare is tight and high crack, cymbals are crisp rather than washy, and the mix is clearly cleaner than previous albums. It's closer to vulgar display of Power's punch rather than Trendkill's murkiness. Vinnie also engineered parts of the record himself. He had become a slightly skilled engineer by this era. Reinventing the Steel was meant to be fist-pumping, anthemic, straightforwardly heavy, and a celebration of Pantera's identity. This album included tracks such as Revolution Is My Name, an anthem of confidence, and shows Dime and Phil are still capable of making magic together. It was even Grammy nominated. Goddamn Electric features Kerry King on a guest solo, the Slayer guitarist. This track is a pure heavy metal celebration. Yesterday Don't Mean Stuff was a message about not dwelling in the past, and All Casts a Shadow was the final track, an eerie prophecy of Pantera's coming darkness. There's also Death Rattle, which was featured in a SpongeBob episode. The songs are powerful and proud, but between the lines you could feel something slipping away. Reinventing the Steel was released March 14th, 2000. Commercially, the release was strong, though not as explosive as Far Beyond Driven or the Great Southern Trendkill. The album reached number 4 on the Billboard 200. This was a very solid showing for a metal album in 2000, an era dominated by nu metal, pop punk, Britney Spears, boy bands, and rap. The album sold roughly 139,000 copies in the first week. Respectable, but less than the 186,000 in the first week sales of Far Beyond Driven. Eventually, this album would be certified gold, selling over 500,000 copies in the US. It didn't hit the same commercial highs as the earlier records, but for a pure metal album released in the peak of the nu metal era, it performed very well. Fans responded very strongly to the album upon release. Longtime Pantera fans loved the return to groove. Many saw it as a spiritual sequel to Vulgar Display of Power. Songs such as Revolution Is My Name, Goddamn Electric, Hellbound, and We'll Grind That Axe for a Long Time instantly clicked with the fans. It felt like classic Pantera energy. Big riffs, swagger, and tight musicianship. Live fans had also loved it. The new songs blended seamlessly with older setlist staples. This album was praised for Dimebag's riffs and solos, Vinnie's drum sound, return to form groove, confident songwriting, and a cleaner, more powerful production, but it was criticized for being not as groundbreaking as earlier Pantera albums, and it felt safe compared to the experimental brutality of Trendkill. Critics also stated that it lacked the emotional intensity of their 1990 through 1996 material. Some reviewers said it was Pantera restating who they were, a victory lap, not a reinvention. But this release happened during some growing internal tension in Pantera, the part that makes the release bittersweet. While the album's music was full of unity and confidence, the band was not. When the album dropped, Phil was active and down in Superjoint Ritual, splitting time between New Orleans and touring. The Abbotts were worried he wasn't fully committed. Communication was improving but still strained, and the wounds from the past hadn't healed. The album's message was full of unity, but the reality was cracks beneath the surface. The months after release exposed all the underlying issues, one being Phil missing interviews and meetings. His addiction even resurfaced. His side projects and commitments started to dominate, causing the Abbotts to feel ignored and disrespected, and internal frustrations grew. March of the year 2000, Pantera launched the Reinventing the Steel tour. The tour was chaotic, unstable, and emotionally heavy. Even though many shows themselves are musically incredible, it was a tour defined by external chaos and internal chaos. It wasn't as explosive as the Trendkill tour, but it would be the final unraveling of Pantera. The timing of the tour was also terrible, as metal was changing. It was the peak of nu metal. Slipknot, Korn, System of a Down, Linkin Park, and Limp Bizkit were dominating the metal scene. Pantera was still huge, but younger crowds were leaning towards the new wave of metal and alternative rock. Instead of being the kings of the scene like 1994 through 1997, Pantera found themselves fighting for space. This created pressure internally, especially for Dime and Vinnie, who wanted Pantera to remain dominant. Despite the internal problems, the band played crushingly tight shows on this tour. Dimebag was in top form, delivering some of the most energetic performances. Vinnie Paul was rock solid as always. Rex Brown held the low end consistently. Phil even had nights where he sounded absolutely monstrous, like he was trying to prove he was still the guy. Musically, Pantera was still deadly. Emotionally, however, was a very different story. Phil's physical and mental health issues unfortunately would return. The touring schedule aggravated Phil Anselmo's back problems again. With the heavy pain came heavy drinking, opioid use, erratic behavior, vocal inconsistency, and sometimes they would even have to cancel or delay shows. On good nights, he slurred, ranted, or seemed distant, and the band couldn't predict which Phil they'd get. Fans noticed it, crew members noticed it, and the Abbotts were deeply frustrated. Communication between Phil and the Abbotts eventually collapsed, and this is where the chaos would get real. During the tour, Phil rarely traveled with the band. Often he would stay in different hotels, he frequently disappeared between shows, and he spent more time with the New Orleans circle than Dime, Vinnie, or Rex. The Abbotts didn't feel he was committed, but Phil felt they were judging him or didn't understand what he was going through. Everyone felt hurt, but no one was talking it out. Rex stated, "We'd finish a show and Phil would be gone. Just gone." Vinnie has said this tour was when he started to feel betrayed, abandoned, angry, and worn down. He hated that Phil wasn't showing up mentally or physically the way he used to. Vinnie wanted the old Pantera back, but Phil didn't know how to give that. By this point, every problem from the Trendkill era was resurfacing, but this time worse than before. On this tour, Phil's rants became more frequent again. He called out critics, attacked new metal bands, talked a lot about real metal, vented about the state of the scene, and rambled about personal issues. Some fans enjoyed the rebellious energy, while others felt uncomfortable and confused. The Abbotts hated the unpredictability, and it often caused post-show fights. Tensions over side projects was also a major factor during this tour. While Pantera was touring, Glam was gaining huge underground momentum. Superjoint Ritual was becoming a major focus for Phil, and Phil was constantly flying to New Orleans for rehearsals and recordings. The Abbotts felt betrayed, and Phil felt creatively confined. The battle over side projects exploded during this tour, turning into resentment. By the end of the tour, the band was barely speaking. Dime tried to reach out emotionally and couldn't. Vinnie pulled back and became angrier and more guarded. Phil went deeper into isolation and addiction, and Rex tried to stay neutral, but saw the writing on the wall. When the touring cycle ended in late 2001, Pantera quietly entered a hiatus that would eventually turn permanent. There was no celebration, no talk of the next record, and no unity, just silence. The Reinventing the Steel tour didn't end in a fight. It ended with exhaustion and emotional disconnection. Everyone hoped things would cool off, but instead Phil dove completely into Superjoint and down. The Abbotts waited for him to return. Months became years, and for 2 full years, Vinnie and Dimebag waited, rehearsing, writing riffs, and keeping Pantera ready for whenever Phil came back. But Phil never came back. The silence hurt them, especially Dimebag, who always believed Pantera's brotherhood was unbreakable. But in 2003, the emotional wound became a rupture. Phil did interviews where he referred to Pantera in past tense. He suggested that Pantera was dead, and he accused the Abbotts of not moving forward, stating that there were no plans to reunite anytime soon. Crucially, he didn't tell the Abbotts any of this privately. They heard about Pantera's end through magazines and interviews. This devastated and angered the brothers. Vinnie later said, "We were blindsided. We didn't deserve that." As for Dimebag, Dime lived and breathed guitar. Waiting for Phil for 2 years made him miserable. He told friends, "I just want to play. I need to play." He had riffs piling up that were meant for a new Pantera record, but without Phil, they were going nowhere. Dime needed an outlet. So the Abbott brothers decided to move on. Pantera was over. Vinnie Paul wanted to start a new band, but he didn't want a Phil replacement. Creating this new band was not easy for Vinnie emotionally. He didn't want to betray Pantera, he didn't want to replace Phil in Pantera 2.0, and he didn't want to live through another band breakup. But he realized they had 2 choices: rot and wait, or move forward and make music again. He chose the second option, for Dime's sake as much as his own. Vinnie said, "We didn't want to copy Pantera, we needed something new." So they set out to create a fresh project with a fresh identity. The Abbotts needed a singer who wasn't trying to be Phil, could handle heavy and melodic vocals, was hungry, committed, and easy to work with, and didn't come with drama either. Patrick Lackman was a surprising but perfect choice. He had been a guitarist for Halford, He was involved in the LA metal scene, and he was a powerful vocalist with a modern edge. Dime and Vinnie said he brought new energy that they desperately needed. Damage Plan's sound was built on evolution and not replacement. It wasn't Pantera 2.0, it was something new. The brothers wanted groove metal roots, modern metal influences, more melody, more varied song structures, and a fresh identity. They wanted to prove that they could evolve beyond Pantera without copying it. The album New Found Power became a blend of thrash, groove, new metal influences, modern hard rock, and emotional heaviness. It showcased Dime's wide range and Vinnie's precision, but with a different tone. Once they began writing, something awakened. Vinnie said, "The first time we played together for Damage Plan, I felt alive again." Dime told his friends he hadn't felt this inspired in years. The brothers wrote constantly, riffs poured out of Dime, and Vinnie shaped them into powerful songs. It was healing, it was liberating, and it was necessary. By late 2003, Damage Plan was born, and the band's lineup was set. Dimebag Darrell on guitar, Vinnie Paul on drums, Patrick Lachman on vocals, and Bob Zilla on bass. The name Damage Plan symbolized building something new out of something broken. The debut album New Found Power was released on February 10th, 2004. This album represented hope, a new chapter after years of emotional turmoil. Damage Plan hit the road in early 2004 with the attitude of a brand new band. Even though Dime and Vinnie were metal legends, they approached the tour with no ego, a desire to reconnect with fans, an excitement to build something new from scratch, and the enthusiasm of a young, rising group. Friends and crew members said the brothers seemed genuinely happy again, writing, performing, and having fun. Vinnie later said, "It felt like our second chance." Unlike Pantera, who headlined arenas and festivals, Damage Plan started in club theaters and mid-sized halls packed with around 1,000 to 3,000 people. This gave the shows an intimate vibe, intense fan interaction, and raw, energetic feel reminiscent of Pantera's early days. Dimebag in particular loved being close to the crowd. He cracked jokes, told stories, and played right at the edge of the stage. They were rebuilding from the ground up, and fans responded really positively. Damage Plan's live performances were praised by fans and critics alike as they were heavy, energetic, technically sharp, and emotionally uplifting for the Abbotts. Dimebag's sound was phenomenal. His solos were fiery, diverse, and passionate. He was excited to explore new styles. Vinnie Paul was rock solid and visibly proud of the new band. Patrick Lachman delivered strong vocals live, balancing singing and aggressive growls. Bob Zilla brought a fun, youthful stage presence, and musically the band was clicking. The audience included longtime Pantera fans, young fans discovering Damage Plan first, club scene metalheads, and people curious to see Dimebag up close. The crowds were loud, loyal, and supportive. Fans often brought old Pantera merch, and Dimebag always showed huge love to them. At their shows, Damage Plan played most of New Found Power, and even played a few Pantera riffs or teasers, but rarely full songs. This was deliberate. They wanted the new band to stay on its own. Compared to Pantera's high-pressure mega tours, the Damage Plan tour was far less stressful, more enjoyable, more personal, and creatively freeing. Friends said Dime and Vinnie were as close as ever, laughing constantly, playing cards, reeling at venues, and bonding in ways they hadn't in years. "We had our brotherhood back," Vinnie said. By the late 2004, momentum was building. Fan response was strong, the band was tightening musically, more dates were being booked, and they were writing ideas for a second album. Future tours were in the works, and plans to explore more melodic and metalcore influences were being discussed. Damage Plan felt like it was just getting started. Dimebag had told his friends he was excited about the band's future, and his writing consisted of the best riffs since Pantera. Damage Plan toured with acts such as Drowning Pool, Shadows Fall, Unearth, and Hatebreed. These lineups helped them pull in younger metal audiences who didn't grow up with Pantera but saw Dimebag as a legend. But the night of December 8th, 2004, things would be different. Damage Plan was performing at Al Rosa Villa, a small nightclub. It was a normal show, upbeat mood, no warnings, no signs of danger. During the band's first song, Breathing New Life, a man suddenly rushed on the stage and opened fire. The gunman targeted Dimebag first. He was killed instantly. This entire situation unfolded in seconds. The shooter was a man named Nathan Gale. He was 25 years old, a former Marine, discharged early. He was known to have severe mental health issues and had delusional beliefs related to Pantera. Investigations later showed that Gale had developed the delusion that Pantera had stolen his songs and that Dimebag owed him something. These events were all in his head. They were symptoms of mental illness. He was not connected to the band in any way. During this tragic event, 4 people were killed that night, including Dimebag. The other 3 people, Jeff Thompson, head of security, Aaron Hawk, one of the venue's employees, and Nathan Bray, an audience member who tried to help the wounded. There were also multiple injured people, but these wounds thankfully weren't fatal, one being John Brooks, the tour manager, a band tech, Chris Paluska, and another fan. Thankfully, none of the surviving victims had life-threatening injuries thanks to rapid medical care. Vinnie Paul, Patrick Lackman, and the rest of the band escaped physically unharmed, though deeply traumatized. During the event, the gunman held hostages and continued to threaten people. The incident finally ended when Officer Jim Nigmeyer entered the venue through a back door and shot the gunman, killing him and preventing further loss of life. The officer's intervention is widely credited with saving many lives. Later, after some digging, the investigators determined that the attack was not a target at Damageplan as a band. The shooter's fixation was specifically on Dimebag. His motive was rooted in paranoid delusions, not reality. The delusions began years before the shooting. There was no rational motive, no personal conflict. It was an act of severe, untreated mental illness. In the aftermath, the music world was devastated. Vinnie Paul never emotionally recovered from witnessing this event. Thousands of fans held vigils nationwide. Dimebag was hailed as one of the greatest guitarists of all time. Damageplan ended immediately, and Pantera's surviving members were changed forever.
I just remember screaming, he's shooting something, and Vinnie came off the drum riser and he's coming at me and he's going, he just shot my brother, he shot my...
And he goes, dude, I just saw my brother get shot in the back of the head 5 times.
I went after the dude and said, you. Cat was fighting with him and he kept telling Cat to settle down, and he wouldn't. And, kept shooting me.
He then moved the gun to the hostage's head. As soon as he put the gun to the hostage's head, I realized that I had to do something to try to save the hostage.
And then just all at once, he just took aim and he just leaned back real slow.
I watched him click the safety with his finger, and when he clicked the safety, I just plugged my ears and turned my head. I stopped and pulled the trigger.
And it was over. It was over just like that.
I looked up and he was down. The cat was moving. And at that point, I ran to the floor where they had Dime on the floor.
And Vinnie kept calling me, and he still didn't know nothing. And then when he called me back and said, my brother's dead.
It was like a real bad movie. None of it seemed real whatsoever. He would take me in his arms. Dad, I love you. Yes, I love that. Sorry. That's what I remember the best.
And I never got a chance to say goodbye in the right way, and it kills me. And I'm so sorry.
When Dimebag was killed, Vinnie did not only lose his bandmate, he lost his brother, his musical soulmate, and the person he had played with for over 20 years. Vinnie and Dime practically did everything together. They were closer than close. During this period, Vinnie went into an intense period of grief. He withdrew from the public eye, openly said he didn't know if he would ever play again, and he refused to speak to Phil Anselmo for the rest of his life. Feeling that the Pantera split and public feuding contributed to the toxic climate before Dimebag's death. For Vinnie Paul, the world had stopped. The man he'd created every song with was gone, taken violently right in front of him. In the blink of an eye. Vinnie didn't even get the chance to say goodbye. For several years, Vinnie rarely gave interviews. Fans wondered if he'd ever sit behind a drum kit again. He spent most of his time with family and close friends, and protected Dimebag's legacy fiercely, honoring him at every opportunity. Vinnie carried his brother's memory everywhere he went. Every story, every photo, every riff. But for the first time in his life, there was no band to go back to. He repeatedly told himself there was no way I was ever going to play music again without Dime. And for 2 years, Vinnie Paul lived outside the music world. But that's when Chad Gray and Tom Maxwell reached out. Around 2005 through 2006, musicians began contacting Vinnie. Chad Gray, the vocalist of Mudvayne, and Tom Maxwell, the guitarist of Nothing Face. They weren't trying to recruit him, they just wanted to make sure he knew he wasn't alone. Tom Maxwell said, "We wanted him to feel love. We wanted him to know music still needed him." For months they gently reached out, and they would hang out, talk, send support, and build trust. At first, Vinnie said no to every suggestion of forming a band, but these friendships started to open a door emotionally. In mid-2006, Tom Maxwell invited Vinnie to come hang out at a casual jam. Just friends, no commitments, no expectations. Vinnie, being drunk on white wine, finally agreed. They played riffs, grooves, improvised jams, and some early ideas that Chad had been working on. The moment Vinnie sat behind the drum kit again, something awakened in him. "We saw Vinnie behind the drums for the first time in years," Tom later said. "This jam session will become the true birth of Hell Yeah." Once the chemistry clicked, more musicians joined the project and this lineup finally came together. Chad Gray was on vocals, the Mudvayne vocalist, Tom Maxwell on the guitar from Nothing Face, Jerry Montano on the bass, also a band member from Nothing Face, Greg Tribbett also on guitar, also from Mudvayne, and finally, Vinnie Paul on drums from Pantera and Damageplan. The idea was simple, a pure, fun, no-stress metal band focused on groove, partying, and positivity. It wasn't Pantera, it wasn't Mudvayne, and it wasn't Damageplan. It was new, it was liberating, it was joy, it was returning to Vinnie's life. The name Hell Yeah came from the phrase Chad Gray used constantly backstage. It embodied excitement, freedom, brotherhood, celebration, and the idea of grabbing life again after tragedy. That word, Hell Yeah, that's what the band was. A celebration. The band recorded their self-titled debut, Hell Yeah, in 2006 through 2007. It was full of southern rock swagger, grooves, big choruses, and had a party metal vibe. It wasn't meant to be overly serious, it was meant to be healing. Songs like You Wouldn't Know and Matter of Time represented the mix of heaviness and positivity the band was going for. Vinnie said the sessions were like a breath of fresh air, the most fun I've had since the early Pantera days. In 2007, Hell Yeah began touring, and fans were emotional about seeing Vinnie perform again. People weren't just cheering the music, they were cheering him. For surviving, for returning, and also for finding joy again. Vinnie said, "This band saved my life." Hell Yeah became his second family. Hell Yeah's second album, Stampede, showed the band tightening their sound. It was still party-driven, southern fried, groove-heavy, and more polished than the debut. Songs like Cowboy Way and Better Man showed Vinnie and Chad embracing melody and more emotional songwriting. The band toured heavily, and Vinnie said these were his happiest touring years since Pantera. In 2012 through 2014, there were lineup changes. A major shift happened when two original members left, Greg Tribbett and Jerry Montano. They were replaced with guitarist Christian Brady and bassist Kyle Sanders. This lineup was huge because it created a more focused band, tighter songwriting, stronger personal chemistry, and a more serious art direction. In 2014, Hell Yeah released their third album, Blood for Blood. This album is widely considered Hell Yeah's creative breakthrough. It was heavier, darker, angrier, and more emotional, and also more polished. It had more modern metal influences. Tracks like Demons in the Dirt, across the beer, and Sanger Poor Sanger show the band had evolved far past its party metal beginnings. Chad Gray began addressing addiction, trauma, self-doubt, violence, and inner demons. Vinnie's drumming on his record was praised as the best since Pantera's heyday. Fans saw Hell Yeah becoming a true metal band and not a side project. In 2016, the album Undeniable was released. This album was a total fan favorite and represented Hell Yeah in full maturity. Big miles from this era included heavy riffs, redefined groove, modern production, a solid fan base, and stadium level chemistry. The biggest moment was when Hell Yeah covered Pantera's I'm Broken, but this version featured Dimebag Darrell's actual isolated guitar tracks, which had been rediscovered. It was emotional for fans and very emotional for Vinnie. It was like playing with my brother again, Vinnie said. This era also saw the band touring larger venues and becoming a reliable and respected modern metal act. 2016 through 2018 was filled with tragedy and grief. These would be Vinnie's final years. This final era saw Hell Yeah push deeper into dark territory, but it was also the period where Vinnie suffered a series of painful personal losses. Vinnie had lost several friends in the metal world, such as Lemmy from Motorhead, Jeff Hanneman from Slayer. These losses deeply affected him. Vinnie had also begun showing signs of exhaustion. Years of touring, grief, and aging caught up to him, but he refused to stop. Hell Yeah had become his home. The band then started on the production of a new album, Welcome Home. The music was dark, honest, mature, and emotional, reflecting the band's growth and Vinnie's state of mind. Unfortunately, June 22nd, 2018, Vinnie Paul would die suddenly at the age of 54 from dilated cardiomyopathy and coronary artery disease. It was not self-inflicted, and it was not drug-related. His death shocked the metal world. Chad Gray said, "We lost our father, our brother, and our leader." And after Vinnie's death, the band temporarily paused all activity. Before Vinnie had died, he completed all drum tracks and much of the arrangement work for Hell Yeah's album Welcome Home. Hell Yeah released the album in 2019 as a tribute to him. Welcome Home is emotional and powerful. Songs like Welcome Home, 333, Black Flag Army, and Oh My God are filled with reflections on pain, mortality, legacy, and inner turmoil. Fans consider the album Vinnie's last gift. Now you're probably wondering what were Phil and Rex up to after the fall of Pantera. While Vinnie and Dimebag were going through Damageplan in the Hell Yeah era, 2004 through 2018, Phil Anselmo and Rex Brown were on very different paths, creatively and personally. Their lives were full of musical reinvention, addiction recovery, reconciliation, and new bands, but importantly, they were not connected to the Abbott brothers during most of this time. Phil Anselmo spent these years in a whirlwind of new bands, underground music, addiction battles, and eventually sobriety and creative resurgence. Following the Pantera breakup and Dime's death, Phil was deep into addiction, overwhelmed with guilt, physically broken due to his back issues, and emotionally unstable. During this time, he continued performing a Superjoint ritual, tried to stay active musically, and entered a long recovery phase after the band dissolved. He also began to face his demons privately. This was one of the darkest periods of his life. In 2006, Phil reformed Down with Pepper Keenan, Jimmy Bower, and Kirk Windstein, and even Rex Brown for a time. Major albums were Down 3, Over and Under in 2007, inspired heavily of the aftermath of Dimebag's death, and Down 4. Phil described Down as a spiritual band and the place where he got to pour emotional honesty without pressure. During this time, Phil fought his addiction, got physically healthier, regained vocal strength, and slowly rebuilt a more stable life. Phil fully embraced the underground, starting multiple extreme metal bands such as Philip H. Anselmo and the Illegals, his heaviest project since Pantera, Arson Anthem, a fast old school hardcore / crust punk band with Mike I.X. Williams, Score, a black metal supergroup, and even built his own label supporting underground metal called Housecore Records. It supported War Beast, Philip H. Anselmo side projects, and Texas / NOLA heavy metal bands. Phil's 2010s were the opposite of mainstream. He chose pure underground aggression. As for Phil's relationship with the Abbotts during this time, it was completely broken. He tried reaching out several times to Vinnie after Dime's death, but Vinnie never accepted the apology or contact. They never reconciled, and Phil carried out guilt and grief for many years. When Vinnie died in 2018, Phil said, "I'm hurt deep down, and I hope he's reunited with Dime." And Selma would even host an annual tribute show honoring Dimebag Darrell, featuring musicians from across rock and the metal world. But one of these events was more memorable than the others, but for all the wrong reasons. The 2016 Dime Bash event took place in Los Angeles and included members of Pantera, Anthrax, Machine Head, Slayer, Testament, Down, and many more. It was meant to be a celebration of Dime's life, music, and legacy. Phil Anselmo was invited as a major guest because he was Pantera's frontman and former bandmate. However, at the end of the night, when Phil walked off stage, he raised his arm in a Nazi-style gesture and shouted a racist phrase. To make things worse, the entire thing was captured on video. Immediately, people in the crowd reacted with confusion and discomfort. Most musicians on stage looked stunned, and fans online erupted once the video surfaced. This was not a joke to the public. It was taken as a clear and unacceptable act. This video went viral within hours. Rob Flynn and Machine Head posted a detailed video criticizing Phil's actions, saying it was not a joke, it hurt Dimebag's legacy, it embarrassed the metal community, and it crossed the line. The video amplified the backlash dramatically. Promoters, fans, musicians, and journalists condemned what had happened, and Phil faced one of the harshest public criticisms of his entire career. Initially, Phil tried to explain it as a joke about white wine backstage, claiming he was yelling white wine and not a racist phrase. Nobody believed this. Within days, Phil issued an apology, a very long one. He admitted he did something wrong, called his actions indefensible, and stated he was ashamed, and took responsibility for his actions. But unfortunately, the damage is already done. The consequences were immediate and long-lasting. He withdrew from the public eye for months, canceling appearances and side projects. He was removed from several festivals. Several musicians refused to work with him. His reputation took a major hit, and Dime's friends saw it as a disrespectful act at a tribute event. Phil had since apologized repeatedly over the years, acknowledging it was ugly, wrong, and something I regret for the rest of my life. Unlike Phil, Rex's post-Pantera years were more stable, but full of band changes, writing, and self-growth. After Pantera, Rex continued playing bass on Down, working on Down 2, A Bustle in Your Hedgerow, and he toured with them as well. Their sound was classic, heavy metal, groove-driven, with modern rock influences. Albums included Kill Devil Hill, Revolution Rise. This was Rex's first fully new post-Pantera band. In 2013, Rex released Official Truth 101 Proof, the inside story of Pantera, which gave him his perspective on the Pantera fallout, caused tension with Vinnie, provided insight into Phil, Dime, and the breakup, and it was controversial but honest. In 2017, Rex released a solo album titled Smoke on This. This was a huge shift. Rex released a solo album where he sang lead vocals. It was bluesy, rock-oriented, heavily personal, and not a metal album. This showed Rex separating his identity from Pantera entirely. Rex's relationship with the Abbotts was unfortunately complicated though. Rex reached out to Vinnie many times trying to repair things, but Vinnie never fully forgave him either. They were on speaking terms at moments, but not close. Rex was heartbroken by Vinnie's refusal to connect. After Vinnie died, Rex said, "I never got to make things right with him, and I'll regret that forever." Rex had spent the decade writing, recording, touring, distancing himself from the Pantera drama, focusing on personal growth, finding his own alcoholism issues, and eventually becoming healthier and more settled. Both Phil and Rex rebuilt their lives in this era. They both stayed active musically, and unfortunately, despite efforts, neither reconciled with Vinnie Paul. Both carried emotional scars from the Pantera breakup. For almost 2 decades after Pantera broke up, a reunion was considered impossible. There were 2 major reasons. One being Dimebag Darrell's death in 2004. Pantera couldn't exist without him. That was a hard line for fans and for Vinnie Paul. And 2, Vinnie Paul refused any version of Pantera without Dime. He made it clear until the day he died in 2018 that he would not perform with Phil Anselmo again, and would not support a Pantera reunion. So the idea of Pantera returning didn't exist until both Abbott brothers were gone. For years the word reunion was off the table. Without Dimebag and without Vinnie's blessing, Pantera was a memory, nothing more. After Vinnie passed, fans and musicians quietly began asking the question again: could Pantera's music ever be performed live again? Not as a replacement for the Abbotts, not as a real Pantera comeback, more like a tribute. This idea stayed quiet for a few years until 2022. Phil Anselmo and Rex Brown decided to bring Pantera's music back in 2022. Phil and Rex, the two surviving classic members, decided to celebrate Pantera's legacy by returning to the stage. The goal was simple: honor Dimebag and Vinnie, and bring Pantera's music back to the fans. They didn't claim this was Pantera Reborn, they called it a tribute to the Abbott brothers. It wasn't about replacing the Abbotts, it was about honoring them. The music meant too much to too many people to stay silent forever. Of course, they needed to choose two musicians who were respected, skilled, and personally connected to Pantera. So naturally, Zakk Wylde would be the perfect pick as the guitarist. He was one of Dimebag's closest friends, a guitar hero with his own legacy, and publicly honored Dime for decades. They chose Charlie Benante as the drummer since he was the drummer for Anthrax, a longtime friend of Pantera, and a strong technical fit for Vinnie's drum style. The lineup felt right for many fans. They weren't replacing the Abbotts but protecting their legacy. In 2022, Pantera revealed a world tour that included US festivals, South American festivals, European stadium shows, and a massive run supporting Metallica on their M72 tour. The world's reaction was mixed but powerful. Some fans loved it. This gave them the chance to hear Pantera's music live, and it was a tribute that celebrated Dime and Vinnie. Some fans, however, rejected it. Without the Abbotts, to some, it wasn't Pantera, and old tensions still shadowed the reunion. Pantera's reunion wasn't for everyone, but for thousands of fans, it was a chance to feel the power of Pantera's music once again. When the band finally hit the stage, something happened. Crowds exploded, fans cried, and the music felt alive again. Zakk didn't try to imitate Dimebag note for note. He played with respect. Charlie had also honored Vinnie's style without copying him robotically. Phil and Rex were older, worn, but present, carrying decades of history on their backs. No pun intended, of course. Videos from South America, Mexico, and Europe show massive crowds singing Walk, Cowboys from Hell, and I'm Broken like an anthem. For a moment, it felt like Pantera never left. Not because the lineup was the same, but because the spirit was still there. Phil and Rex have been direct. This is not Pantera coming back as a full band. This is a tribute to the Abbott brothers. They will never release new Pantera music, and they will never pretend Dime or Vinnie can be replaced. The Abbotts remain the heart of Pantera. Most fans eventually settled on one of two views. Some viewed it as a beautiful tribute, a way to honor Dime and Vinnie, a chance to bring Pantera's music to a new generation, and a celebration of legacy. Some, however, saw it as an unnecessary revival, saying that Pantera had died with the Abbotts, and Pantera must be remembered, not revived. But both reactions come from a place of love for the band. Pantera's reunion isn't about rewriting history, it's about remembering it. Remembering Dime's joy, remembering Vinnie's power, remembering the music that changed heavy metal. Even if the band is gone, the legacy still lives on. Vinnie Paul Abbott was truly a one-of-a-kind drummer. He stood out because he embodied power, precision, groove, generosity, and heart in a way almost no other drummer or personality ever has. His legacy is enormous, not just because of Pantera, but because of the kind of person he was and the way he shaped the entire metal community. Vinnie crafted a drum sound that became a signature of modern metal. It had punchy, chest-hitting kick drums. His double kick tone on Vulgar, Far Beyond Driven, and Trendkill became the blueprint for modern metal production. His snare crack also cut through walls with its sharp, loud, and instantly identifiable sound. Many compare his snare drum to a cannon shot. His massive toms had a thunderous tone that was unique to him, and we can't forget his surgical tightness. Even in the wildest Pantera riffs, he was flawless. He wasn't flashy, he was powerful, precise, and groove-driven. There is a reason drummers today still reference his style as the gold standard. Vinnie also defined groove metal. Pantera didn't invent groove metal alone, but Vinnie Paul was the backbone of it. He combined heavy metal, classic rock swagger, funk-inspired pocket, and southern rhythmic sensibility. His playing on songs like Walk, 5 Minutes Alone, I'm Broken, Becoming, and Domination created a new language for metal drummers. Vinnie brought a swing and bounce to heavy music that hadn't existed before. He even became a world-class studio engineer. Not many fans realize this, but Vinnie did a ton of engineering and production work behind the scenes, and became a master of drum miking, mixing, room acoustics, and tone shaping. He co-produced Pantera's albums and Damage Plans. Terry Date often said Vinnie was essential to the band's studio sound. This made him rare, a drummer who could also build and shape the sound of entire records. We also can't forget Vinnie's loyalty, because it was legendary. Everyone who knew Vinnie said the same things. Loyal, generous, warm, very forgiving, and most of all, a brotherly protective presence. He took care of his friends, supported younger bands, treated stagehands and fans as equals, and was known for remembering people's names even after years. In a world full of egos, Vinnie stood out because he had none. Vinnie brought joy to everything he did. Vinnie wasn't just a drummer, he was a spirit. He loved barbecue, parties, meeting fans, laughing, storytelling, and making others feel welcome. He turned dressing rooms and venues into celebrations and was the morale center of every band he played in. People around him always said, Vinnie brought the fun, he was the heart. Even after Dimebag's death, Vinnie's strength was incredible. He suffered one of the most traumatic losses a musician can endure, but he stayed strong, never lashed out publicly, and honored Dimebag every day, pushed himself to keep living and showed fans what resilience looks like. His return with Hell Yeah was an act of courage and kept his brother's spirit alive. We also can't forget that he helped shape 2 successful bands after Pantera. After Pantera, Vinnie didn't fade. He co-founded Damage Plan with Dimebag and Hell Yeah, his second life in music. Hell Yeah especially showed his versatility, his ability to adapt, and his passion for creating new things. He could have retired after Pantera, but instead he built new legacies. Today, Vinnie is universally remembered as a mentor, a supporter of local bands, a positive force, and a legend who stayed humble. Common stories from musicians would be Vinnie took us out to dinner, Vinnie gave us a shot when no one else cared, Vinnie treated us like family, Vinnie made time for everyone, etc. It wasn't just his playing, it was his generosity of spirit. Vinnie's legacy is massive and permanent. He is remembered one of the most influential drummers in history. As a person loved, respected, and admired for his kindness. As a brother forever bonded with Dimebag, even in death. As a musical figure, pioneer who helped reshape heavy metal in the 90s. As an icon, a reminder that true greatness included humility, humor, and heart. When Vinnie died in 2018, the metal world didn't just lose a legend, it lost one of its good guys. Someone whose presence mattered in every room he ever walked into. Dimebag Darrell's legacy is special and important because he combined revolutionary guitar playing, electric stage presence, and a larger-than-life personality that made him impossible to replace. His influence continues to grow long after his death. He's remembered not just as one of the greatest metal guitarists, but as a person who changed the culture of heavy music through skill, kindness, and pure passion. He is one of the most influential guitarists of all time. Dimebag shaped how modern metal guitar is played. His style blended crushing groove, advanced shredding, blues feel, creative pinched harmonics, wild vibrato, and fearless experimentation. Guitarists study his tone, his phrasing, his right hand attack, his ability to move from razor-sharp riffs to soulful leads. You cannot talk about metal guitar without talking about Dime. He is in the same league as Eddie Van Halen, Randy Rhoads, and Tony Iommi. Modern guitarists in bands such as Lamb of God, Avenged Sevenfold, Gojira, Slipknot, and Trivium name him as a primary influence. Dime helped create and define groove metal. Pantera took heavy metal in a new direction, and Dimebag drove that evolution. His riffs created a style built on syncopated chugging, thick mid-range tone, rhythmic punch, and blues swagger inside heavy music. Songs like Walk, Mouth for War, I Am the Night, and Becoming are foundational for the genre. Groove metal exists because of Dimebag's guitar language. Dimebag did not just play great, he had a signature tone that guitars still chase. It featured scooped yet thick distortion, sharp pick attack, saturated sustain, Randall's solid state crunch, Bill Lawrence pickups, and a unique wah and whammy use. Every piece of his tone is experimental. He never stopped trying new things. You can never deny Dimebag's stage presence either. It's unforgettable. Dimebag lit up every stage he touched. He was known for constant engagement with the fans, playful attitude, unstoppable energy, and a complete love of performing. Even people who never met him feel connected to him because of his joyful presence. He made metal feel fun, not angry. His personality is one of the most loved in metal. Everyone who met Dime describes the same person: humble, generous, hilarious, welcoming, and down to earth. He treated fans like his friends. He treated opening bands like equals. He never acted like a superstar, and he was the heart that brought people together. His positivity is a huge part of why he is celebrated. His partnership with Vinnie is also iconic. The Abbott brothers are viewed as one of the greatest sibling duos in music history. Their chemistry shaped Pantera, Damage Plan, and overall the sound of the 90s. Fans still see the relationship as something rare and powerful. When you talk about Dime, you talk about Vinnie. When you talk about Vinnie, you feel Dime's presence as well. They went everywhere together, and they stayed with each other to the very end. The tragedy of Dime's death cemented his mythic status. Dimebag's death froze his legacy in time. It shocked the music world and created a sense of collective responsibility to honor him. People remember his kindness, his enthusiasm, his humility, and his love of music. There was no bitterness in fan memory, only love and respect. Modern tributes will keep his spirit alive. His influence is kept alive during Dime Bash concerts, Pantera tribute tours, covers by modern metal bands, signature guitars and gear, guitar YouTubers teaching his riffs, and murals and memories worldwide. Every generation, new fans discover him. Dimebag is remembered as a once-in-a-lifetime guitarist whose playing, personality, and kindness permanently changed heavy music. He shaped the genre, inspired millions, and left behind a legacy that is still growing today. When Pantera hit with Cowboys from Hell and vulgar display of power, metal was shifting, glam was dying, grunge was rising, and thrash was fading, Pantera stepped in with thicker riffs, sharper production, incredible groove, raw aggression, technical musicianship, and a no-nonsense attitude. They revitalized heavy music during a period when genre needed a new identity. Pantera became the blueprint for modern heavy metal. They had also created and defined the groove metal movement. Groove metal exists because of Pantera. The combination of Dimebag Darrell's riffing, Vinnie Paul's syncopated drumming, Rex Brown's tight bass foundation, and Phil Anselmo's power and intensity created a new sound that blended heavy force with rhythmic swagger. Bands influenced by this foundation include Lamb of God, Machine Head, Slipknot, Gojira, Avenged Sevenfold, and Killswitch. Nearly every modern metal band carries some trace of Pantera's style. Pantera had also set new standards for guitar and drum innovation. Dimebag became one of the most influential guitarists of all time, and Vinnie Paul became one of the most influential drummers of all time. Musicians studied Dimebag's tone, harmonics, whammy bar ideas and phrasing, and Vinnie's precision, kick drum patterns, and room-filling sound. Pantera did not just write great songs, they changed how metal is played. Their albums became era-defining classics. Several Pantera albums are now considered essentials in heavy music history. Cowboys from Hell made them a new force. Vulgar Display of Power became one of the most influential metal albums ever. Far Beyond Driven hit #1 on the Billboard charts, stunning the mainstream. And the Great Southern Trendkill showed artistic depth and raw honesty. Each release pushed the genre forward. Their live performances are always remembered for being legendary. Pantera on stage was loud, chaotic, and charismatic, and also unforgettable. Their live reputation is a huge part of their legacy. People who saw them still talk about it as one of the most intense live experiences of their lives. The Pantera breakup and tragedy also became a part of the myth. The emotional and painful split between the Abbott brothers and Phil Anselmo added a human dimension to their legacy. The 2004 murder of Dimebag froze the band in time, solidifying them as a legendary, but permanently unfinished story. Fans still feel the loss deeply because the band meant so much to so many. Vinnie Paul's death deepened the emotional legacy. Losing Vinnie in 2018 reinforced the sense that Pantera's original brotherhood was gone forever. It also created a wave of tributes that reminded the world how important the band had been to heavy metal. Pantera's influence continues even through modern tributes. The current Pantera touring lineup with Phil Anselmo, Rex Brown, Zakk Wylde, and Charlie Benante exists solely to honor Dimebag and Vinnie. It has reintroduced Pantera's music to younger generations, and crowds at these shows often sing every single word. That tells you everything about how much the catalog still resonates. Pantera never pretended to be anything. They were authentic, loud, aggressive, passionate, and loyal to their fans. Their attitude is a huge part of their legacy. People connected to their honesty in their music. Pantera reshaped modern metal through groundbreaking musicianship, unforgettable albums, and a level of authenticity that still inspires musicians and fans around the world. Pantera's story is one of the most powerful journeys in the history of metal music. It's a story about evolution, ambition, brotherhood, conflict, pain, and triumph. And it's a story that never takes a straight line. From the early days in Texas, playing glam rock in tiny clubs, to the moment they broke through with Cowboys from Hell, Pantera showed what happens when the band refuses to follow anyone. They didn't chase trends, they created their own. Through vulgar display of power and far beyond driven, they became a force that couldn't be ignored. They pushed metal forward with sound, attitude, and energy that felt larger than life. The crowds grew, the records climbed the charts, and Pantera stood at the front of a new generation of heavy music. Yet behind the scenes were real people. People dealing with pressure, with expectations, with addiction, and with the cost of non-stop intensity. The great Southern Trendkill captured that reality. It was honest, brutal, and fearless. It showed a band that had grown stronger and more fragile at the same time. When Pantera ended, it didn't end clearly. It ended with silence, distance, and unresolved wounds. No final tour, no goodbye, just 4 lives moving in different directions, each carrying their own version of what the band meant and what went wrong. After that came the unthinkable, the loss of Dimebag Darrell, a guitarist who brought joy to everyone around him, on stage and off. His death wasn't just a tragedy for metal, it was a tragedy for music. A tragedy for his family, for his friends, and for the fans who found light in every note he played. Vinnie Paul carried that weight for the rest of his life. He honored his brother every chance he got. He found a way to keep living, to keep creating, and to keep celebrating the spirit that he and Dime had built together. And when Vinnie passed in 2018, the world lost not just one half of Pantera's heartbeat, but a man who lived and breathed music until his final day. Yet somehow the story didn't stop here. Phil Anselmo and Rex Brown chose to bring the music back to the stage, not as a replacement, but as a tribute. They stood under the Pantera name again, joined by Zakk Wylde and Charlie Benante, and brought these songs to a new generation. Crowds roared, fans cried, people who never got the chance to see Pantera finally felt what the power was like. Pantera today isn't the same band as it once was. It can't be, but the spirit behind the music remains. The energy, the aggression, the emotion, and the connection is what keeps Pantera alive. It lives in every guitarist who learned a Dimebag riff. It lives in every drummer who was inspired by Vinnie's precision. It lives in every fan who found strength in Phil's voice, or the groove in Rex's bass lines. It lives in the crowds that still chant the band's name with pride, and it lives in the memory of 2 brothers from Texas who changed heavy metal forever. Pantera wasn't perfect. Their story is messy, complicated, and human, but that's what makes it real. And that's why their legacy continues to grow long after the final album, long after the final tour, and long after their final goodbye. Because Pantera wasn't just a band. Pantera was a movement. Pantera was a moment in time. Pantera was lightning in a bottle, captured by 4 people who gave everything they had to the music. The story ends here, but the impact doesn't. The music remains. The legacy remains. And the story remains. And as long as people keep listening, keep celebrating, and keep remembering, Pantera will never truly be gone.
This next song is the last song. It's one called Primal Concrete Sweat.
one more time tonight.